nymphing is almost exactly like that. In the check nymph, the way that the leader is rigged is you have a bottom fly or a point fly, and then where just above that, where your tippet material is attached, you leave a little tag end, and then you can put your dropper. That's basically a stationary dropper. So that's in check style nymphing, and you can use either 2 or 3 flies. But in the Polish style of nymphing, you can see that your dropper fly is actually attached using a loop, and that is you're able to let your fly slide between 2 blood knots that are tied into your leader. And really, that's the only difference that, at least that I could find, between Czech style nymphing and Polish nymphing. Again, both are done more at short distances. So then you jump on over to the French style and the Spanish style, which were developed to do more of a long distance type of casting or fishing, more from a distance as opposed to directly over the rod tip. This is just like the Czech and the Polish. It's a tight line technique. In here, as opposed to the 9 to 15 foot leaders with the Czech and the Polish technique, you're using leaders that far exceed even 25 feet. So they're very, very long. The rod lengths are 10 to 14 feet. You're using light to medium weight flies because this is typically used for when you have very maybe some still water or very clear and shallow areas where if you try to nymph fish with shorter rods, you're just going to spook the fish. This allows you to cast and fish at a greater distance. With the French nymphing, instead of just a cider or a straight piece of monofilament that's brightly colored, they use a coiled cider, which is like a strike indicator. So you can kind of see there's tippet rings on either side of the cider that I have pictured here, and you just attach that into your leader and then put your tippet on the bottom side of the cider with your flies. So anyway, that's the French style, and Spanish is very close to that, except they don't use the coiled leader. It's more of it's like a 2 foot long section of cider material, again, brightly colored monofilament. It's actually built into the leader, just down below the butt section with a tippet ring, and then your tippet comes down below. And again, typically 2 flies, a heavier weighted fly that would be on point, bouncing along the bottom, and then a dropper fly. The Perdigon, I don't know if anybody's ever used that, but it's you put some epoxy on it, and it's very slim profiled. It's heavily weighted with a bead and sometimes even lead wraps, and it goes right like a rock. It just goes right down to the bottom when you use these flies. They're pretty terrific. So anyway, that incorporates the Czech, the Polish, the French, and the Spanish. Those are all European techniques. And then I had heard terms like high sticking and tight line nymphing. And again, high sticking, both are general terms, but high sticking is just a technique that's used, doesn't have to be Euro nymphing. It can be any kind of rod where you basically have your arm extended out, you lift up the line so it's off the surface of the water, so the currents can't mess with your line, and then, or your strike indicator, and that way you're able to get a more natural drift. So that's what you call high sticking. And then tight line nymphing is where, again, another general term, and it's nymph fishing where you don't use a strike indicator. You just have that tight line connection with your flies, and that just helps with more of a tactile feel when you're fishing. So given all of that information and background, so now what is actually Euro nymphing? So Euro nymphing has really boiled down to be where they've taken the best of each of those techniques, the Czech, the Polish, the French, and the Spanish, and it's all combined into one called Euro nymphing. And so there's all different types of, I guess, rigging options and all, but that's basically where it's come from, or all those various styles. The Euro nymphing technique, typically you look at using a 9.5 to 11-foot rod. You use pretty long leaders, in my estimation. I typically use anywhere from 7 foot to 9 foot in my typical, dry fly or nymph fishing, not Euro nymphing, but just in my conventional type of fly fishing. So long leaders, I mean, these, when we say long with Euro nymphing, these are really long, 15 to 22 feet, has a butt section, a high visibility cider, which is brightly colored so you can see it. It stays up off of the surface of the water. I'll show you that in a little bit more detail here in a minute in the diagram. And then tippet material. And typically you'll use 2 flies. I've actually used 3 flies before in Euro nymphing. Sometimes you'll just use a single fly, but most times when I'm rigged up, I'm using 2. I have found Euro nymphing to be very, very effective. If I'm fishing with friends and they have gone out and they're nymphing just using a strike indicator, I'm usually out fishing them, and no kidding, it's like 10 to 1, because it's you're able to keep your flies down in the strike zone a lot longer than fishing with strike indicator, where the strike indicator just can wreak havoc based on the current with the drift of your flies. Having that tight line connection with your flies and leading them along through the water, or just basically keeping up with the current, makes all the difference in the world. And as we all know, fish feed subsurface 90% of the time. So if you want to catch a lot of fish, Euro nymphing is a terrific way to do that. I particularly like this because it requires a lot of concentration. I mean, you really have to be watching the entire time while you're fishing. And there's I guess a feel or a tactile element to it, as well as a visual element. So you can feel the flies bouncing along the bottom, you can feel the take, but you can also see as you're watching that cider. And so I think having both of those elements makes it extra exciting to me. I think it's pretty technical, actually, to fish this way, and it's just another reason that I like it so much. You don't use any split shot to get your flies down. You're using heavily weighted flies with and a lot of times with a heavy tungsten bead or the lead that's built in. And you don't use any strike indicators. You do use a cider, which I'll show you here in a minute. But typically you don't use any strike indicators like what we would think of, like an airlock or a pinch-on indicator or anything like that. So let's see, let's move on. And we will talk about the gear. So like I said, it's another opportunity to go shopping, to pick up some specialty type equipment. But let me tell you right from the beginning that you do not have to go out and buy, I know this is going to disappoint some people, but you don't have to go out and buy a brand new rod to be able to do this. You don't have to get the, all the different accessories. There's a few things that you do need. But if you wanted to try it out with your regular fly rod, you could test it. But just like with anything, if you move on to a design that's specifically made for the type fishing you're going to do, obviously it's going to be a big advantage for you. So anyway, let's just start by looking at the rod, the Euro nymphing rod. Again, I think I mentioned to you, it's they're typically 9.5 to 11 feet long. And what having a longer rod, what that helps you with is getting a farther distance away from the fish. When your arm is extended and you have that long lever, my favorite is a 10-foot length of a rod. You're able to cover quite a bit of water with that long rod. Typically, the weights are in the 2 to 4 weight range, and the tip of the rods are very soft, very flexible for a few reasons. It helps to protect some very light tippets that you're using, and because you're casting fly and leader, you aren't casting typically your fly line. It helps to turn over those flies as you're casting because you don't have a whole lot of other mass. So it's going to be a softer tip to help with that turnover. And also the softer tip and the very long length of your rod serves as a lever, or gives you extra leverage when you are fighting and playing some larger fish. So don't let it fool you that the 2 and the 4 weight rods are just super lightweight and you can't catch any big fish with them. Because, for example, even though it's rated like a Moonshine 3-weight rod is weighted as a 3-weight, the butt section actually is like a 5 or a 6-weight in strength. So I wanted to make sure to mention that, because that's something I wasn't really aware of at the beginning when I first started out. Josh, I saw a couple of questions popped up. I think something about the slide. Is everything going okay?
It's okay. I think we might just have one person's having some difficulty, but you're good, Susan.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on here. So you want to have a rod that's light enough that your arm isn't going to just get exhausted through the day, because again, your arm is pretty much extended when you're Euro nymph fishing. You aren't just, right by your side. Your arm is actually extended out over the water. And so if you think about having a 9.5 to 11-foot rod, the tendency might be that the rod is a little bit tip heavy, because you have at least another 1.5 feet or so, or maybe more than what your typical fly rod is. So you want to have that rod, even though it has that extra length, to be super lightweight, so your arm isn't going to get tired. And you want it to be so that all you would have to put on the back end of that rod is no more than a medium weight reel that could balance out the entire outfit. I particularly like the down locking reel seats. And for those of you that aren't familiar with up locking or down locking, the up locking would be the little the screw clamp that you turn at the bottom of your reel that goes up towards the tip of the rod when you're trying to fasten down your reel. As it screws upward, that would be the up locking reel, and then the down locking would be the opposite way, where you would put the feet of your reel in the little groove, and then you would screw it down towards the butt section. The farther down your reel is from your rod, the more of a balancing I think that you would see. And I'll show you a picture of that in just a minute. I personally really enjoy fishing with the Moonshine rods. They have a Euro rod that's called the Epiphany. They have a 2-weight and a 3-weight. I have both of them. My 2-weight is a down locking, and that's the one that I pick up all the time. It's a 10-foot long 2-weight, and I absolutely love it. I did talk to Moonshine the other day, and they're coming out with a 4-weight Epiphany that's going to have an even stronger butt section. So if you wanted to go out for some smaller steelhead or salmon, that you would actually be able to fish with that because it would be a whole lot stronger in the butt. I do know that Cortland, Sage, Winston, Thomas & Thomas, I think Orvis, I know that a lot of folks are starting to hop on board the Euro Nip bandwagon. But I know I can personally speak to the Moonshine rods. It's a great price point. You get 2 tips, a case, and the warranty and everything. So I really enjoy them. But let me show you a quick picture of the balance. So the top picture would be incorrect. This is having a reel that's way too light, and your arm is going to be very, very tired. You can see the tip end is pointed downward. So all day long, I would just be fighting to keep that tip up or horizontal. And so it's going to really cause your arm to have some fatigue. If you can get a balanced outfit, meaning you've got a reel that's on the back end that as you hold it, it's going to balance out right at where your hand is, then you're going to find you're going to be able to fish a whole lot longer through the day. I can tell you there's absolutely no reason to buy an expensive reel. You just wouldn't need it. If for some reason you did want to get an expensive reel, it would be mostly for aesthetics, because you really don't need it. Your reel is only serving the purpose, especially in this case, unless you go out for salmon or steelhead or something where you might need the drag. For most of the fishing, at least that I do on any tailwaters or any small creeks, it's just a placeholder for the reel. So I just have inexpensive reels that are on my Euro rods. Any questions so far, Josh, that you wanted to ask? I'll just keep moving if not.
Yeah, there's no questions right now for you, Susan.
Okay, so let's move on to the fly line options. Well, actually, before I do that, let me back up and talking about the rod and the reel. If you wanted to use just your regular 5-weight, or 4-weight, fly rod, you could do that, but just keep in mind if you're using like a 9-foot rod or an 8.5-foot, you aren't going to get near the reach that you would with a Euro rod, which again typically is 9.5 to 11 feet long. You're going to miss out on that additional distance, and probably you aren't going to have that soft tip that's built into that longer rod. So that's one of the advantages of having that longer weight rod or longer length in the lower weights. All right, so
Susan,
let's take.
Susan, there's one question.
Okay.
Ken Santo was wanting to know if you can use a Tenkara rod for Euro nipping.
Yeah, I don't see why you couldn't. Yeah, in fact, you could take a look when I start to show you the formulas. Let's go back to that question, and we'll just see if that just wouldn't work out. I think that you could. You would be limited, of course, to the distance that you would be casting, out just based on the length of your overall line, where you can actually extend a little bit longer line if you have a reel and are able to pull some line off. But that would be the only downside. But I definitely think you could build a Euro leader that you can attach to the Lillian, no question about it. Okay, I hope that helped you. So let's get on to the fly line options. When I very first started, I wasn't real sure if I was going to like Euro nymphing or not, so I didn't rush out and buy the Euro rod. I didn't get the line. I didn't get all of that right off from the beginning, but I have read that just to try it, you could cut off the back of an old fly line and use the running line. So that's what I did. I had an old 3-weight fly line, and I just I cut the heavy weighted section off, and I was left with just the level, constant section of the running line. So I tied that onto the backing, and then I tied on my Euro leader to that, and it worked. It worked well enough for me just to be able to get the feel and to realize then how much more I would really like it if I stepped on up. The downside by and I'll show you a picture of this in just a second, but, well, actually, I'm just going to go ahead and have it in here, so then you'll be able to see it. If you'll notice in this photo, you'll see the slack line that forms between the cork grip and the first guide, and then along the rod, you can see the slack that's where gravity is pulling the line down. So if you use a fly line that's not specifically a Euro line or even a very thin running line, gravity is going to pull that line down, creating slack, and slack is going to be completely detrimental then to your tight line technique, because the whole idea is you're wanting to have a complete connection to your flies, and if you don't have that, then you're already going to be in the hole. So that's why having a fly line or a specialty fly line like a Euro line really is advantageous, and let me explain why. The Euro lines are very, very thin diameter. So even if you were to take a 2 or a 3-weight running line, which is already pretty thin, and compare it to a Euro line, the Euro line is even much, much thinner than the running line, of one of your typical fly lines. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Again, I would encourage you, if you aren't sure you really want to invest, in it, it's something to at least try. But I'll tell you, one of the best ways to try is using a very long mono leader. And I personally, I have the Aero, I have the Rio line, I have a nip line by Airflow. So I have both of those that I have tried, and I have gotten to where I really like fishing just with a very long mono leader. And if you're wondering, well, what does that even mean? Well, instead, my fly line doesn't even come off of the reel. I have such a long leader, I mean, like 30 feet, that most of what's running through the guides on my rod is just the leader itself. And I can see several turns of the leader even that stays on my reel, and then the fly line is back behind it. And if you decide to go that route, which I'll show you the formula, if you decide to go to that route, you could just use your regular fly line, attach the long mono leader to it, and then your Euro Nip setup after that. So that's just something to consider. I've tried all the different ways, and it's just something that I really enjoy fishing that way. But a lot of people don't like the feel of just holding mono in their non-rod hand. They don't like the way that it feels when they're stripping it in. They don't like the way that it feels as after it goes tight and you're playing the fish. It can be cutting in people's hands. They like more the plasticky feel of the fly line. So again, I think it's a personal preference. But if you do go to the Euro Nymph line, I know Cortland, I think it's the Cortland line and the Airflow line have a taper design it's just a level line. Whereas Rio, they have more of a double taper type design. So if you go to buy one, just take a look at the different sizes. I think Airflow and Rio has kind of a one size fits all. You can use them from a 2-weight to a 4-weight on a rod. You don't have to buy a 2-weight or a 3-weight or a 4-weight actual Euro Nip fly line. But Cortland, I believe, does have the 2, 3, and 4 where you can buy just based on what your rod is. Okay, so there's also something out there that you might want to think about trying. I will go ahead and just give full disclosure here that I have not tried this yet. The Shorty, it's called the Rio Euro Nip Shorty, and it is a 20-foot long fly line, or basically it's kind of like a shooting head, or if you ever have used a sink tip where you just attach that directly to your fly line. That's kind of like what this would be. So an application would be, okay, you've heard this presentation. I think I'm going to try Euro nymphing. I'm not really ready to give up. I've got a 9.5-foot regular rod. I'm just going to try it out. Well, you could get this Euro Nip Shorty, and on one of the days that you go out fishing, you just take off your leader. You go ahead and attach using a loop-to-loop connection, attach the Shorty just to your regular fly line, and then you can have your Euro Nip leader at the other end of your Shorty after you put it on. I think these run like $30. In a typical Euro Nip line, I think are in the $50 to $60 range. But anyway, this would be kind of a not so much investment, to get into it and just see if you're going to like it, especially if you don't like the idea of the mono feel in your hand. Anyway, this could be another option. Did I see a question that was popped up?
Yeah, Susan, Mike's got a question. It says, would the old steelhead running line 30-pound, like 0-weight level work? So old steelhead running line.
Is it monofilament, or is it an actual fly line running line?
He hasn't said so.
Do what?
He hasn't said yet.
Okay. Oh, it's an actual fly line. Well, you'd really have to check to see what the diameter of that running line is, because again, what you want to avoid is having this slack line. And so if it's like greater than 22 thousandths of an inch, I think you're going to run into that problem where it starts to sag between the guides. You absolutely could try it out and just see. And then if you start to see that you don't really have that nice tight connection, well, then you know it won't work. So anyway, I hope that helps you, Mike. All right, let's move on to rigging. What you're going to need, and this is what goes on to the end of your fly line. This would be your leader and your tippet. And again, when I very first started out, I really didn't know much about building my own Euro Nip leaders. So I went to the fly shop and I just bought a manufactured tapered Euro Nip leader. And you'll see in the picture right in the middle, Rio sells these. I know Cortland has them and probably some other manufacturers, but I have been using Rio products. This particular one is 11 feet long, and you'll see on the package it says 11 to 12 feet. That doesn't mean they're estimating, well, it's either 11 or 12 feet. I don't know, can't remember. That means it's the tapered butt section is 11 feet long, and that tapered butt section has a loop in it. You can connect it to your fly line if you want. I particularly like nail knots, but that's what you can do, a loop to loop with it. And so it's kind of an opaque white color, and it tapers down to a 0x. So it's 11-foot tapered leader down to 0x. And then the last foot is they have a blood knot tied onto the leader, and there is a foot of cider material. And if you'll see the spool just down below in the picture, that's a spool of 4x cider material. It comes in 2 and 4, 2 and 4x from Rio. And that, so there's the opaque 11 feet long tapered leader down to a 0x. And then the last foot that's already blood knotted on for you is the orange and the green cider material. And that material, the diameter of that particular leader that I have shown is a 2x. It's just the level section of tippet that's 2x. And the only difference from regular tippet is that it's a monofilament or nylon, and it's an orange and green colored. So it's very, very visible. At the end of that, there is a tippet ring. And the reason that you use a tippet ring is so that you're able to go from a thick diameter to a very thin diameter without hinging or losing anything or losing any strength. So if I were to take, for example, if I had a cider that ended in 2x, I had a 2x cider, and then I tied on a 6x tippet, well, you would never do that. You know, you can only step down and by steps of 2 at the maximum. So if you had on a 2x, you'd really need to go to a 4x and then a 6x and step it on down that way. To go from a 2x to a 6x, or, you know, that's just going to be too drastic. But when you use a tippet ring, then you can go from, you know, you can go from a 0x to as tiny a thin a tippet, 7x, 8x as you wanted, and you wouldn't lose anything. It wouldn't hinge, and then you also wouldn't lose any of the strength in your tippet. So I hope I explained that well enough for you. Let's take a quick look. Well, while I'm still here with this rigging, even though you buy the leader, typically something's going to happen. Maybe your cider breaks off under a rock or whatever. It's always good to carry an extra spool of cider. If I had done this picture correctly, I would have had a 2x spool, not a 4x, because if you tried to blood knot the 4x to the 0x, you would just have a really hard time getting that blood knot to hold. It's just too drastic of a diameter to make that happen. And you wouldn't really want to use a surgeon's knot. It's just too bulky of a knot. So the correct picture would have been to have a spare 2x spool of cider material down below it in case that one broke off. And then also another package of tippet rings just in case you lost your tippet ring. So that would be, when I was first starting out, That's the exact setup that I had. I got the Airflow fly line or Euro line. Once I graduated up from the running line, I bought the Euro Nip leader, had a spare cider, and then I also had the Tippet rings. So let's just take a look at the formula. This may help just a little bit just to see how it looks. So the leader in this diagram would be the opaque colored leader that goes all the way down. I think I mentioned to you that's the 11 feet that goes all the way down to the 0X, and then the 2X is the bicolor cider, that orange and green material that you see, and then the Tippet ring. And all of that comes right in the package from Rio. And then you just use Tippet material, depending on the size of the flies that you're using, or actually, I look at the type of water. If I have really broken water and I don't think the fish are going to be spooked that easily, I may just use a 4X and sometimes a 5X. Very seldom do I go down to 6X, but I usually carry 4, 5, and 6 in my pack for just in case.
Hey, Susan, we got a question.
Yep.
Mark would like to know what knot on the Tippet rings.
Oh, very good. It's just an improved clinch knot. It's what you use. So just think of the Tippet ring is just like the eye of a hook. So, you know, once you tie on your Tippet material to the end of your Tippet ring, just tie it on like you're tying on your fly. Or I use an improved clinch. If there's another knot that you like to use with your fly, you could try that as well. Any other questions?
That's it for now.
Okay. So when you tie on your first piece of Tippet material, you'll tie that right to the Tippet ring. The length of the Tippet is going to vary in length depending on the depth of the water that you're fishing. So if you're going to fish a Tandem Rig, the way that I do it, I may pull out 3 or 4 feet of Tippet initially to attach. Pull out another piece of Tippet, lay that right over top, just like I'm tying my surgeon's knot. I'll tie a surgeon's knot, and I'll leave an extra long length, 6 inches maximum. Otherwise, if you use a lot longer length of tag, it's going to wrap around the other end of the Tippet. Mine are typically 6 inches long, and then I nip off the other end of the tag. So I have one tag in that's 6 inches. I tie the fly there. And then, again, it's going to be dependent on the depth of your water for your second fly, or what we call the point fly. So for those that have heard point fly and they don't really get that, that's the bottom fly, the one that's attached to the main section of your leader. That's the point fly. And then the fly that's tied off of the tag in is called the dropper. And
Susan,
it's going to be based on depth. Yes.
we have one more question from Tom Bader. He would like to know, how long is the cider?
It can be anywhere from 1 foot to 2 foot. In this particular Rio setup, this one, if you remember on the package, it said 11 to 12 feet. 11 feet is the actual base leader, the opaque color. And then it goes on to 12 feet. So that means there's an additional 1 foot of cider material, but you can make it 1 to 2 feet.
There's another question from Don Lambert, and that is, why would you not use a Tippet ring to split off the tag fly?
That's a really good question. One of the reasons that we use really fine Tippet after the Tippet ring is because we don't want to have any friction or surface area more than we need to, so that we can get those flies down through the water column and the flies can float very naturally. If I were to put a 2mm Tippet ring for my tag section and then tie my fly off as it's going through the water, it could cause some extra disturbance where the actual knot may not cause as much friction. Now, that's the way that I have it set up. That's the way I've typically seen others set it up. but you might want to give it a try and just see. I just think the surface area of the tippet ring, I don't know, it may cause it not to float quite as naturally. But, you know, that's one of those things that if it's easier for you to tie that on, I don't know that there would be anything wrong with trying it. And you might want to go to an area where you know holds a lot of fish and test it out and see, okay, here's one tied on with the surgeon's knot tag, and here's one tied on with the tippet ring, and just see if you see if there's a difference in how the fish react. But that's an excellent question. I like that. Any other questions?
Yeah, Jack Randall's got a question. Let me find it again. I just lost it. The hole would cause extra drag, maybe? That's what he's saying.
Yes, that's what I was talking about. The surface, yeah, just that surface area, right? And make it to where it doesn't float quite as naturally. That's my guess is what would happen, but it's worth trying it out.
Dick Durchie says, what about a tag off the tippet ring that has a split shot to bring the rig down faster?
Well, we really don't. So in Euro nipping, you don't use any split shot. It's all you use. Your weight is with your the weight of your flies, which would be with the beads or with built-in lead wraps when you're tying them. So you know, we just don't use we don't use split shot. You know, the idea is that the entry of having that extra weight could also hinder the tactile feel. You want to have a direct connection to your flies, and having that split shot could cause you not to be able to feel the take or feel the flies bouncing along the bottom as well. I hope that helps. But you know, there's no Euro Nip police that's out there. So if you want to try using some split shot, you know, go for it. See what you think. I personally just like to build the weight into the flies themselves. So, okay, any others? Otherwise, I'll move on.
There is a question, what size flies are you using? Now, you may get to that.
You know, I typically use, and this may surprise you, but most of the flies that I'm using are size 14s. And I use a lot of jig hooks, you know, that because I am going to be down close to the bottom and tagging the bottom quite a bit. I'd rather have the point riding up so that it doesn't get snagged so much on the bottom. But 14 is about as large as I'm using, unless I'm using a streamer, which I'll get to here in just a minute. But typically 14. Sometimes you can use a 16 or an 18, but most everything that I'm using is a size 14. Okay, so if you decide you want to graduate up from using the manufactured leader, you could buy material of your own and construct a leader, and that's what I have done. I found that the Rio leader was a little bit thick for my preference. The cider material seemed to be a little bit thicker, and I wanted something that was just a little thinner to test out. And so what I will use, and I think I mentioned to you, instead of using the fly line out of or off of my reel, I typically use Maxima Chameleon, which is a mono. It's kind of a brownish color leader material, and the color doesn't have anything to do with, you know, why I use it. What's really nice about Maxima or this Chameleon is that it comes in all different sizes. I happen to use the 20 pound, which is a 17 thousandths of a diameter. Is what I have been using, and I'll use about 30 feet of that, and then tie it directly to my fly line, just in a loop-to-loop connection, because I don't care about the loop is going to be on my reel. It never even comes off of my reel. And then I blood knot some amnesia, which is just a very stiff material. I use a 15-pound amnesia. It also is brightly colored and contrasts nicely against that brown. I can actually see that amnesia. It's 14 thousandths of an inch. I don't have any trouble getting a good blood knot between those two. And then I'll use, I have been using cider material from Cortland that's 12 thousandths of an inch, which is just a little bit bigger than a 0x. 11 thousandths of an inch is a 0x. So this is 12 thousandths of an inch. I know that they make a cider material that's even thinner than that, but you don't really need to go much thinner than that with your cider, because once you put on your tippet ring, then you can go as thin as you want, beyond that. And so, so that's typically the way that I have it set up with the tippet ring. And then, because I go through so much fluorocarbon, and I know that not everybody is going to agree with this, and I certainly respect those opinions, but for me, I usually buy a big spool, several spools of cigar, and it's in the, I think it's a 4-pound test. I know it's a 7 thousandths diameter, is what the diameter of the fluorocarbon is, which is approximately a 4x. And so I use that quite often. I mean, I do have, I really like Mirage, and I'll use 5X and 6X Orvis Mirage quite a bit, but typically, if you look in my bag, this is what I have, and it's a whole lot less expensive. So anyway, if you haven't tried it, and next time you're in, a lot of times when I'm in, like not Bass Pro Shop, what's the other one? Cabela's. They carry it, but a lot of times you can't find the 4-pound. I typically have to order it on Amazon, but I get the 4-pound, and it's so much more cost effective. So just a thought. And then get a package of 2mm tippet rings. They're just the small, tiniest little tippet ring. And I'll give you a hint. Instead of taking the tippet ring off the little holder and trying to thread it through, keep it on the little holder that it comes on, and just use it as a threader, and that will hold it in place until you actually get it off. 9 times out of 10, if you try to take it off and have it in your hands, you're going to drop it in the water, and then you'll use up all your tippet rings before you even got one on your line. So let me just show you. Here's the leader formula. I used it actually today, and it's just some Maxima. And again, if you don't like holding the nylon, or if you don't like holding the leader material in your hand, if that doesn't feel good to you, that's when you may want to go ahead and get the fly line. Again, I think it's just a personal preference. I've done them both, and I've just gotten to where I really like fishing this way. So I've got the Maxima, 12 feet or so, sometimes even longer, if that's all I'm going to be using. It's nothing to put on 20 feet of that Maxima, so it stays completely in the guides. It never comes off of the reel. Then I have 3 to 4 feet of amnesia, again, a stiffer material that keeps it doesn't coil up on you. And that's another thing about Maxima. If it comes off the spool and has any coils, or it happens to be cold or whatever, if you just give Maxima, if you give it a strong tug to straighten it out, it will hold that straight position after you tug it really good and tight. It's amazing the way that it works that way. But anyway, I'll use Maxima, and then about 4 feet or so of amnesia. It's a bright red color. Then I'll put on 1.5 to 2 feet of a cider material. In this instance, I use the Cortland, and then a tippet ring, and then depending on the depth of my water, I'll put 1.5 feet or 5 feet or so of my first tippet section, tie my second tippet section on using a surgeon's knot, and then I have my little tag in, put a 6-inch dropper, and then 1.5 to 2 feet is typically what I use between my flies. Right? Okay, and then as far as let's talk about fly placement and the different options and techniques that you can use with Euro nymphing. So I mean, you would think because of the name Euro nymphing that you're only going to be using a nymph rig, but you can actually use, let's say that you see some fish rising. You could, on your dropper fly, you could actually use a dry fly, and maybe one that's buoyant enough that would be able to carry your nymph that you have on underneath on your point fly. And what's so nice, and I have done this many times, when you cast out your dry fly and all of that fly line and leader is off of the water, you get the most wonderful natural drift. And I mean, it really, really looks good. There's no mending that's involved, and you have your line off of the water, and it floats very, very naturally. And so it's not uncommon to use a dry fly and a dropper in this setup. You could use a dry fly, a soft tackle, and a nymph fly. If you want, you'd have to check regulations to make sure you can fish with 3 flies. Some places don't want you to, but you could do 2 or 3 flies. And today, I fished and I had a lot of luck with a streamer. I had a big black woolly bugger that I was using in some very deep runs. And it was interesting because I had tried fishing these 2 runs in the past just with a couple of the nymphs that I really like. And I never was able to get down deep enough. And lo and behold, I put on that black woolly bugger, and I was able to get right down. And boy, I tell you, I caught, I think, 5 different rainbows in areas that I typically could not catch them before. And it was just because I wasn't getting down deep enough. So don't think that you can't switch it up a little bit. You definitely can fish streamers. You can fish soft tackles with your Euro nymph rig. You can just change things around. I've done it and I really like it. Now, there's I know that some of the guys online are starting to post about using these micro thin leaders, and you can read about those. I'll tell you a little bit about them. I would recommend, if you're going to give this a try, start with using the Rio leader first, just to kind of get used to casting that. Because remember, you aren't going to have that heavy. In typical fly fishing, what you're casting is the weight of the fly line itself. And so this is a little bit different, and I'm going to talk about casting this in just a little bit. You don't have that really nice heavy weighted fly line that's going to help you with your casting. So if you try to pick up a micro thin leader and cast it, it's going to be very frustrating and difficult. But if you start and gradually work your way up, start with the Rio leader that's a little bit thicker, maybe then go on to the formula that I had talked about using Maxima Chameleon, and then maybe move on to the micro thin. You'll alleviate some of that frustration and you'll get a little bit better. So with the micro thin leaders, it's not uncommon to have a 3X or a 4X cider material. You know, the cider spools that I showed you have a 3X or 4X cider material that's a level line attached to your level fly line. And then you can just nail knot that. In fact, I recommend nail knots if any of your fly line is going to come in and out of your guides, because you don't want it to get caught and break if you get a fish on. But anyway, you can you take that 3X or the 4X of the cider material. Again, it's level cider, and you run that 12, 13 feet, kind of like what I was talking about, the Maxima Chameleon. Now that's a very, very thin leader. That is actually your butt section. 3X to 4X, tie on a tippet ring, and then attached to that tippet ring, you have your tippet and your flies attached. And, you know, in that case, you'd go down to like a 6X, something very, very thin. Now you're probably wondering, why in the world would I ever want to do that? Well, if the idea is to keep all the line off of the water and you want to cast at farther distances, the only way that you're going to be able to do that and to get that really steep angle with all the water, all the line off the water and way away from you, is if you have a very, very light leader ahead of you. And so the heavier your leader, the more sag that you're going to get and the more of it's going to touch the water. And I didn't really believe that until I tried it. And I couldn't believe that I could fish so far away from me and lift the rod tip, and I would just have a very long angle directly into where my cider was. And I could keep all of that line, all of that leader off of the water. And so the whole idea with the micro thin leaders is that you're able to cast at a longer distance and keep all of that line up off the water. Now, when you do that, when you have those micro leaders, and so you have your initial cider, you know, the orange and the green or whatever color you choose, and that's attached to your fly line, and then you have your tippet ring. Well, then you can have an intermediate cider attached to that. So let's say that you have a very long first piece of tippet material that goes down to your first dropper tag. Well, there's a new material that's out right now, and it's called, it's a neon wax. It actually looks like chapstick. And on that, even though you have your cider material that is attached to your fly line, after your tippet ring, let's say that you want to keep that other section of tippet out of the water, you can add a secondary cider just above your dropper, and you put it on your clear section of your tippet, just like you would put on chapstick. You just run this, you know, either a multicolor or any color. So you've got your initial cider that you can actually see, and then you have the secondary cider that's just made out of wax. That way, if you decide you want to change depth, then you can just take a tissue or a napkin, you wipe off the wax, and you can change the depth easier. It doesn't cause you to have to retie anything. You can just use that wax instead. So anyway, I thought that was worth bringing up. It's a newer product that I hadn't seen before until just recently. So I just wanted to mention it to you that that's out there. So before we move on to, I know this is a lot of information, but before we move on to the casting piece of things, I just wondered if there were any other questions out there. Anyone?
No additional questions.
Okay. All right. Let's quickly, I know we're getting, I don't want to run it out of time here, but we'll go into the casting. You may notice in this slide, I am set up to do a roll cast. Well, roll casting will not work with Euro nymphing. You have no weight on the leader behind you to serve as an anchor point at all. And so you might as well just give it up. Roll casting will not work. You're just going to be very frustrated if you try to do it. You need to learn the oval cast, the bow and arrow cast, and the tuck cast. Those are the three basic ones that I would recommend that you learn. So I had a neat little video on here where I could show you how to do these casts, but we couldn't get video to actually work with the presentation, or at least I couldn't get it to work with Apple. So what I did is I just broke up the video to try to show you step by step of the oval cast. With your regular basic cast, you pick up your line off the water and your fly line goes over your rod tip. It's kind of like you're casting it up and over a tall wall, you know, right behind you. That's not the type cast that you want to do with Euro nymphing. You'll do an oval cast, which means as you're sweeping your rod around, that the fly line actually goes under your rod tip and then comes back around and over. And that's going to help you to keep from getting tangles and, you know, those heavily weighted flies. You definitely don't want them to crash into your rod tip. It can definitely break it. So if you aren't familiar with the oval cast, I would just suggest you could probably Google or YouTube oval cast. And there's a really great video. I'm trying to remember the name of the fella. I think he's an FFI master instructor, and I think it's called Casts That Catch Fish. And I think that's an excellent video. And I know he demonstrates the oval cast. He also demonstrates the tuck cast. Has anybody, I'm curious to know if anybody has ever heard of that one. It's called Cast That Catch Fish. It's excellent if you ever have a chance to pick it up. But I do know that he has several YouTube videos, and they are very, very good. So take a look at those. You can slow motion them down and see every little step, since I can't show you a video on here. But anyway, oval cast, you have to know how to do that. Because the tip is so flexible, it makes a bow and arrow cast. It's just wonderful. I use a bow and arrow a lot. If I'm trying to get over under tree limbs and just in some really tight places, I used it a couple of times today, actually. And honestly, when I catch fish on using the bow and arrow, it's usually my favorite fish of the day because it's a little more technical. You have to shoot your line right into where you want it to go. And then when you get it in there and you hook a fish, it just makes it, to me, even more special to actually catch one. So I love the bow and arrow cast. If you haven't tried it, make sure that you hold on to the bend of the hook. You don't want the point anywhere close to your fingers. I have turned loose. I have reared back and turned loose and got it stuck in my finger before, which I bet some of you that have tried it have done that too. But you want to really put a deep bend in that rod, and you'll be amazed at the way that you're able to slingshot that those flies because they're so heavily weighted. You can really get them out there, and it's pretty exciting when you do it correctly for the first time. All right, let's move on to the tuck cast. So with the tuck cast, if you're trying to get down to depth very quickly, imagine dropping your fly, just holding it above the water and dropping it straight in, which I bet you many of you have done like I have. When you've dropped your fly, it's amazing how quickly they will go right to the bottom and then you never find them again. But if they're entering in from a vertical angle and they have no resistance from the fly, from the leader or the tippet at all, they are going to sink to the bottom immediately. And so that's the idea of the tuck cast. You cast a little bit at an angle, kind of up. You have a low back cast, a high forward cast, and you overpower. And you're still doing an oval cast, but as you cast forward, you overpower that cast a little bit, and the overpowering almost makes the line kind of ricochet back to you, and then it tucks back underneath. And so that means when it tucks underneath, it's going to have a little bit of slack on the line, and your flies are just going to drop vertically straight down into the water. I tried to illustrate that with the line just sketching over the rod in red, and you could see how the line, shot out, but then it was tucked back under so that those flies would get to depth very quickly. And it's something just to practice on. You may not get it right the first time, but I'm telling you, the very best video to look at is the one I told you about, the Cast That Catch Fish. And I think you'll see how he does it, and it's a really great technique to have. Okay, so that's the cast. Let's talk about once you actually cast and you get your flies in the water, now what do you do? How do you drift? Well, you want to make sure that you immediately get tension in your line. You don't want to have a lot of slack between your hand through the guides or anything. Immediately, you want to get tight to your flies. Now, you aren't going to actually pull the flies through the water, but you want to move your rod tip. You see how my arm is extended, and you want to move your rod right along with the flies, keeping up with the speed of the current. So that's why you have to continually be moving. It's almost like walking a dog, but it's walking a dog that's right there next to you, not one that you're having to pull, through the water. Because if you pull them through the water, then you're going to get an unnatural drift, and then it'll just look like it's a water skier flying through the water. So you keep your hand up, you keep your rod tip ahead of the flies, and you'll notice that you get just a little bit of a belly in your leader as they're drifting through the current. And you'll know if you don't have a connection to it. But again, you'll start to feel the bouncing of the flies on the bottom. If there's a little twig or a leaf or anything that catches on the flies, the tip is so sensitive, you'll be able to feel that right away. So anyway, that's what the drift will look like. Let me talk to you a little bit about the hook set. As you're drifting, now I'm fishing in this current. The current is running from right to left. And so as I'm fishing, think about where the fish is going to be pointed. So fish feed pointed upstream, so the current can bring food into them. And so if I were to lift my rod tip straight up when I felt a fish, or if I lifted to the right, I would basically be yanking the flies right out of the fish's mouth. So again, I just had to do this like one picture at a time. But when you do the hook set, you actually want to set the hook parallel to the water, not opposite of the way that you're, not to the right. But again, I am setting the hook parallel and downstream so that it actually will catch in the fish's mouth or in the lip, because I'm moving those flies down towards the fish. So I hope that makes sense and that's understandable. And then playing the fish. Remember, you have a very light, flexible rod, and I encourage you, especially if you're using a 2-weight. I don't know if you can see the large C bend that's in this rod. It wasn't that big of a fish, but on a 2-weight, and it's a 10-foot long 2-weight rod, it's really going to flex it tremendously. If I were to raise it straight up and down, I'd probably lose the fish. But keeping it off to the side and really putting that deep bend where I can use the power of the rod down in the butt section really helps to protect those tippets, and it helps to be able to play the fish a little bit better. Okay, I'm going to move on a little bit quicker. Let's get into my favorite flies. Again, you're using flies that are typically tied in with some weight, a few lead wraps, and then various sizes of bead heads. You can get away with a wide range of tungsten beads to use on your hooks if you use jig hooks. You're able to slip several different sizes, larger sizes of beads on the jig hooks, where with a standard hook, you might not be able to do that. So I do use quite a few jig hooks. Some of my favorite flies to tie, I love a heavily weighted pheasant tail. Again, I tie those up in size 12s and 14s. I love those. There's a fly that I've been tying for a couple of years. You'll have to look it up online to get the tying recipe, but it's called the never bug. I think I call it like an everything bug, because it has a little bit of pheasant tail, a little bit of hare's ears. I mean, it's almost like an everything bagel. There's a little bit of everything tied into it, but it works really, really well. That's the bug at the bottom of the picture there. I really love a Pat's rubber leg stone fly. I tie these with beads and without, and heavily weight them with lead, and I do very, very well with those. So those are a couple of the flies that I really, really like. I don't know if I think I skipped over my Frenchies. I love a Frenchie and a thread Frenchie. And if you aren't familiar with Lance Egan or Devin Olson, you should look up those guys. They're big time into Euro nymphing, and they're on the U.S. Fly fishing team. And they have created a lot of their own patterns. And in a few minutes, I'll show you the resources that I recommend buying their videos and also some of the books. They're just amazing, and I think they're very, very good teachers. And I think that it will help you quite a bit. So I'm almost getting to the end for those of you that are getting antsy. I really want to stress that there aren't any hard and fast rules that you have to work with. You know, somebody asked about using split shot. You typically don't use split shot in Euro nymphing, but if you think that's going to help you, why not give it a try? I mean, just experiment on the depth of, you know, the distance between your flies, experiment on the length of your Maxima chameleon, experiment with the little Rio Shorty, experiment with the steelhead old fly line. I mean, you want to adapt, and that's what I have done. I've read and I have researched and I have studied, and I've pretty much adapted the Euro nymphing for my own individual style and the situations of where I fish. And I think you should try to do that too. Like I said, there's no Euro nymph police out there that's going to get you or shame you. The technique is going to be best when you're wade fishing. It's very difficult to do from a boat because you really need to be stationary to be able to get that drift. Not to say that it's impossible. I have done it from a boat, but the best time to do it is when you're wade fishing. I find fishing smaller rivers, creeks, and streams, to me, that's when it's absolutely the best. And it's my favorite kind of fishing, doing it that way. It's a little more difficult if you're in very slow, deep pools, because you don't have enough current really to move that fly along. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just not quite as effective. And on tailwaters, it's a little bit more difficult when you just have those long, slow runs. But if you think back to whatever your favorite tailwater is, you know that there are quite a number of different riffles and runs below structure where you may not be Euro nymphing all day, but there are definitely runs where the Euro nymphing technique would actually work. So this one is for Tim. The Music City Fly Girls, a lot of the Fly Girls really, really enjoy fishing Euro nip style. And last year we went to Canada. This was we had 21 of us that went to Canada. That was my first overseas trip, planning a trip. Canada's not really like overseas, but it was for me. But we had a really good group, and we fished quite a few places. The Bow River was our big trip where we did a float trip. But my favorite of all was fishing on the Old Man, which is up in the mountains. You can see the Old Man River here. And then I really enjoyed fishing the Livingstone, which is a tributary of the Old Man. They have the most beautiful cutthroat trout, and you can see the waterway behind, and it was absolute perfect for this Euro nymphing technique. I absolutely loved it. A little bit closer to home, a place where I go quite often that I know that you guys are familiar with is Lake Cumberland State Park. I really enjoy Hatchery Creek. We were there just this past February before the whole world shut down. And we stayed there at the lodge. We had a large group that were there. If you haven't ever been there, you have to go. I mean, it is a nice lodge, and the cabins are nice, and it's just a good place to get away. And the food is good, and you can't beat the view in this restaurant. And the fishing is really good. I caught this was in February, and I caught quite a few fish there that day. But this just happened to be on my Euro setup. That's all I have ever fished there was with my Euro rod, and I absolutely love it. So the resources that I mentioned to you, and I think this is being recorded, so you'll probably be able to view it again and get this information down. But the videos I mentioned by Devin Olson and Lance Egan, they're on. It's called Vimeo. Is the app? If you Google it, you'll be able to find it. And you can. I want to say they're like, I don't know, $18, $19 or something for each of the videos. You can either get a DVD or just download it to your phone or iPad or computer. But it's modern nymphing elevated, and then adaptive fly fishing. And they lay out in great detail, even greater than what I have done, all the different formulas for the leaders. And then I've really enjoyed the books, Tactical Fly Fishing. That's one by Devin Olson. And then Dynamic Nymphing is by George Daniels. And I really have enjoyed both of those books and have found them very useful. So anyway, that's it. I think I've gone a little bit over time. I apologize for that. I didn't realize it was going to take that much, but hopefully you've gotten some information out of it. And if you've got any questions, I'm more than willing to answer them.
I'm going to applaud.
Thank you,
Great
Tim.
meeting, Susan. It was great.
I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. Does anybody have any more questions? We'll wait here a second if you do, and then if not, we'll go ahead with the prize giveaway.
And if anybody does have questions that maybe they just don't want to ask here, just look up Southern Brookies and feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, Susan, I do have one question. This is Tim. Does Moonshine Rod Company still have the discount available if you put in the code Southern Brookies?
Yes, yes, I asked them if I said I know a lot of my clients and friends would love to buy a Moonshine Rod. I don't get anything from it. I just said, if you'll, is there any way you can have some kind of a discount? And he said, yeah, tell your people they can have 10% off, and it's free shipping anyway, so it's a true 10% off. So yeah, just plug Southern Brookies into the promo code, and it'll give you that 10%. So yes,
That's great.
Good thought, Tim.
All one word, lowercase, and I've got 3 of their rods and love them.
And great price point and great customer service too.
Go ahead, Josh. Sorry.
Oh, don't be sorry. You guys are good.
I haven't seen any other comment or questions. Voda said, very nice presentation, Susan. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad y'all liked it.
Tom Bader, Susan, thanks, Susan.
Okay.
See anything
Well,
else? All right.
I went ahead and Randy sent me over the list for everybody that registered, and I've just put them in the order that they got registered based on this list that we have right here. And then it's in this random organizer button. We have 3 prizes tonight. Once I hit random organize, it's going to re-randomize these, and whoever's in the first place is going to win an autographed copy of Susan's new book once that's available from publishing. Whoever's number 2, you are going to, Tim, go ahead and say something so they can see the picture of the book.
The book will be published, correct me if I'm wrong, Susan, June the 9th.
June the 9th is the publisher.
And you can buy it through NKFF, and we're going to have them shipped directly to Susan, and she will sign them to you with a personal note, and then they'll come back to us.
Yes, and make sure everybody knows who the foreword is by. My dear friend.
Ron Ellis from the club wrote the foreword to the book, and it's very good. And I've published that foreword several times in the newsletter and in emails and so on and so forth, and it's very good.
Cool. So that'll be the first prize. Second prize is going to be this day pack, really nice day pack here. We got it from Wolf Rod Company. And then third prize is going to be an NKFF mini slimline case here with the logo on it. And I'll put a baker's dozen flies in there for whoever wins this. So here we go. Without further ado, we're going to randomize this list. And there's our winners. Donald Schrantz, you're going to win the personalized book. Thomas Bader, you are going to win the fly fishing day pouch. And Alan Hale, you will win the flies. I'll talk it over with Sheila and figure out what we're going to do, mail it to you guys, or we'll hold on to it for you or what, but we'll get it figured out and you guys will be the prize winners. All right, Sheila, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. All right, guys. I just wanted to thank everybody. Thank Susan for what a great meeting. It was perfect. We love it. Thank you all for hanging in there with us with all of this. Thank you for participating. And hopefully we'll do another virtual meeting next month if all goes well. So thanks for everybody, and we'll see you guys soon.
Hey, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.